Good morning, everyone. I'd like to, before we get started, remind the audience and the board that we audio and video record our meetings. So for the board members, I will ask that you kindly remember to push your little button when you have something to say on the record and push it when you're done. Also keep in mind that we can only, with our system, have 5 active microphones at a time, so it is important that you turn off your microphone so others have a chance. And with that, I will turn it over to our Acting Planning Committee Chairman Totten, as Director Fuentes is out with the President today.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We'll call the meeting to order and ask the Secretary to call the roll.
Director Durante? Here. Director Frege? Here. Director Hobson? Here. Director Pang?
Here.
Director Ross?
Here.
Director Totten?
I'm here.
Director Fuentes? We have a quorum of 6 present with 1 absent. If the record would also show that Directors Anderson, Buchanan, Colson, DeWitt, Lewis, McGallis, Troiani, and Chairman Dillard are also present.
Okay, next item on the agenda is approval of minutes. Is there a motion and second to approve the minutes as submitted? Moved by Director Pang and seconded by Director Durante. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Director Durante? Aye. Director Frege? Aye. Director Hobson?
Yes.
Director Pang?
Yes.
Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Totten?
Yes.
6 ayes and 1 absent.
Next item on the agenda is an ordinance approving the IGA with the City of Chicago to relocate or to co-locate RTA customer service functions at 4 city sites.
Good morning, directors. This morning I'm requesting board adoption of an ordinance authorizing the execution of an IGA between the RTA and the City of Chicago's Department of Family and Support Services. This IGA allows the RTA to co-locate the services offered at our customer service location currently within the pedway of the Cook County building at 69 West Washington, with services offered at the 4 Chicago City sites located at the Chicago City Hall at 121 North LaSalle, room 100, 6117 South Kedzie, 2019 West Lawrence, and 1767 East 79th Street. Co-locating these services offered by the RTA at these 4 city sites will allow us to bring the centers closer to the customers where they live in their communities. It'll provide a one-stop shopping experience for customers seeking both city and RTA services, and it will help us to further strengthen our relationship with the city's Department of Family Support Services office. The agreed-upon rental cost for the RTA is $250 per month per location for a total of $1,000 per month for a period of 24 months. We do have the option to extend this lease arrangement for another 2 years at the end of the lease term. The cost includes the use of the city's IT infrastructure, IT equipment, office furniture, and approximately 1,000 square feet of space at each location, and the use of the city's security and maintenance staff. We plan to close the 69 West Washington office on December 3rd and then begin operating out of the 4 city sites on December 4th, utilizing existing staff that work at 69 West Washington. We plan to advertise this move through several channels, including print media, press releases, postcards, posters, and banners located at the current and new sites, and through Tyvek RTA permit holders that will advertise the new locations. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none.
There's one.
Director Hobson?
Thank you. I just want to compliment you and staff for the cost savings that you're realizing by moving out of your existing locations and into the new locations. I think that's fantastic, and congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? If not, we'll entertain a motion. Moved by Director Pang again and Director Durante again. Secretary, can we use the last roll call?
We sure can.
Okay.
Is there leave?
Leave for the last roll call. There is leave granted.
6 ayes and 1 absent.
Okay, there's no further business to come before the Planning and Administration Committee. I will entertain a motion and second to adjourn. Moved by Director Pang again and Director Durante?
No. We can't adjourn. We actually have an additional item 4 on the agenda. There should be another page.
I only have one page.
Okay, well,
The actual agenda has item 4 on it, which is
I
a presentation of the
probably didn't
24
print that page on your script, sorry.
the 2014 Regional Performance Report. So before we've officially adjourned, if we can move to that item. And so we can turn to Donna.
Okay. Good morning, Director Totten and members of the Planning and Administration Committee and members of the Board. This morning I will be presenting the 2014 Performance Measurement Reports, a regional report and a sub-regional report. The regional report, as you may remember, takes data from each of the service boards, aggregates it together, so we have performance that we can look at for the whole region, and the sub-regional report looks at each individual service board by the service board as a whole and by mode. The reports, as you know, are required by the RTA Act, and they include the set of measures that the board adopted. The set of measures was developed collaboratively with the service boards through a performance measurement task force, and we continue to actively meet with that task force to analyze results each year. The reports are for the most recently completed calendar year, 2014, and they are based on data submitted to the National Transit Database of the FTA. We use this data because it provides consistency in definitions and it is audited by the federal government. So the audit goes through the summer and the reports, the data is finalized in August, and then we aggregate the data together and prepare our reports. It's the same data that we use for the peer performance measures, so therefore we get consistency within our region and also within the peers that we use nationally. The performance measurement reports evaluate performance in 5 service areas. Service coverage monitors how service is available, how much service is available to people in the region, and how much of that service is actually used. Service efficiency and effectiveness evaluates how much is spent on supplying that service and how much service is provided and consumed, in relation to how much is provided and consumed. Service delivery reflects the quality of the service provided. Service maintenance and capital investment indicates the allocation of capital funds and the replacement and maintenance of infrastructure components. And then finally, service level solvency assesses financial condition to ensure that there are sufficient resources to meet current and ongoing budgetary needs. So as I go through the presentation, I'll be covering performance measures in each of these areas. Excuse me. So 2014 was a bit of a challenging year. As you remember, it started off with the polar vortex events that made service delivery difficult. So this negatively impacted both ridership and operating expenses. And especially for ridership, it affected it to an extent that we couldn't fully recover by the end of the year. If we look at ridership for the past 2 years, we have had decline. But over the 5-year period, we've experienced modest growth, about 0.8%. The region's capital needs continue to grow, no surprise there. The most recent capital needs assessment reported $36.1 billion in capital needs, with $19.5 billion in a backlog of already overdue projects. The second regional customer satisfaction was conducted in late 2013 and early 2014, and also through the spring of 2014, with ratings that were lower than the 2011 results, again affected by the poor weather during the winter, but also the transition to Ventra, which was difficult and challenging for customers at its outset. Despite these challenges, fare revenues improved for each service board, so that's a bright spot in 2014. None of the service boards implemented a fare increase, but average fare has tended to rise with the implementation of Ventra, as we see people taking more pay-per-trip fare types rather than buying the discounted multi-use passes. So what I'll be doing is looking at service for each service area. So first we'll go over regional service coverage, and then I'll go through a highlight from the sub-regional report by looking at a service board. Here we can see a snapshot of regional performance for the service coverage measures. The arrows indicate 1-year and 5-year performance trends. The direction of each arrow refers to the change in value between the 2 time periods, and the color indicates whether that change was favorable or unfavorable. So obviously what we want to see are green arrows. So as you can see here, performance was mixed. The first two measures reflect the amount of service made available to the public and are improved for 2014. The first time point in this 5-year period is 2010, and that was the year that there were rather significant cuts made at PACE and CTA in service in response to the financial crisis and budget tightening measures. So since we started the period with a low base, over time we've been able to increase service somewhat and had growth in service levels. The last 4 measures all include ridership as a component and therefore show declines in performance. In 2014, as ridership decreased 2.4%. However, as I mentioned earlier, over the 5-year period, we had slight ridership increase of almost 1%. So this had a positive impact on passenger miles traveled. In addition, passengers are taking longer trips. That's a trend we've been noticing year to year, and trips are about 5% longer. So there, that on the last line, you can see a green arrow for over the 5-year trend passenger miles traveled. Trips per resident is roughly equal to 2010. That's the yellow arrow there. However, trips per vehicle revenue mile are lower because more service is being offered in comparison to 2010. And that was the year, as we said, that CTA and PACE had service cuts. Now we'll look at the sub-regional report and take a closer look at CTA ridership, which really has had some interesting mode shift trends over the 5 years. So although ridership was down in 2014 for CTA and the region as a whole, 2014 was the 7th year that CTA had ridership that exceeded 500 million passenger trips. The chart on the left shows ridership for CTA bus and rail. The bus is indicated on the blue line, and you can see that it has trended downward, and at the same time, rail has trended upward. If we look on the chart on the right, we can see this ridership trend occurring for a longer period of time of 10 years. So the blue bars represent bus ridership, and the orange shaded area is rail. And you can see that bus is at a lower level. It's at its lowest level in the 10 years of 276 million trips. And rail ridership is at its highest level. It's actually at its highest level in 50 years, so that's pretty significant. And you're seeing a real shift in mode there. Bus used to be 62% and rail 38%. Now rail has climbed to be almost 50% of the ridership. Next, we'll look at regional service efficiency and effectiveness. Again, we are seeing mixed results. The top 2 measures include the amount of service provided as an input, which was up in 2014 and again in comparison to 2010. After adjusting for inflation, we can see that 2014 was a good year, with cost per unit of transit capacity staying level and cost per vehicle revenue mile actually lower. So service was able to be added efficiently. The bottom 2 measures are affected by ridership, which was down in 2014 and only 0.8% higher compared to 2010. Now we can see the effect of higher operating costs spread over roughly the same passenger trips and miles, with the result being the unfavorable arrows for the 1 and 5-year trends. But here we'll take a closer look at PACE ADA paratransit cost per trip, and we can see that PACE's performance is actually improving. This chart is started in 2011 rather than 2010 because there was a change in methodology for counting passengers in 2010. So we wanted to have in 2011. So we want to have consistent data. So on an inflation-adjusted basis, which is the orange line, PACE spent 0.3% less per passenger trip versus 2011, as shown by the yellow line. So this is an encouraging result because, as we know, this is a high cost per trip of providing this level of service. So to see that it can remain stable over this period is very encouraging. Here we'll look at service delivery. Each service board reported negative results for on-time performance for 2014. Again, this was a challenging year because of the winter weather during the start of the year, and it impacted results for the whole year. In fact, 2014 had the lowest on-time performance of any of the 5 years under review. However, the number of reportable incidents were down in 2014, but higher compared to 2010. And again, referencing the customer satisfaction survey, which was administered in 2013 and 2014, we see that we have declining performance for our main indicators of customer loyalty, value of service for fare paid, and overall satisfaction. Over 3/4 of the respondents did report favorable satisfaction with each of these measures. And for one of our key measures, would you recommend this service to another person, we had an 87% response rate. so that's still an 87% positive rate. So that's still positive. But again, the cold weather, the transition to Ventra are things that affected these results. Here we can look a little more carefully at Metra's on-time performance. The orange dotted line shows that in 2011, Metra implemented a stricter on-time performance definition, and it caused the recording of on-time performance to drop a little bit. But every year since then, it has improved, and even in 2014, they did rather well despite the cold weather that they experienced and the difficult times during the early part of the year. Now looking at regional maintenance and capital investment, you can see from all the red arrows on this screen that this area represented a difficult one for the service boards. Even the green arrows at the top, which show the capital program funding, are really just what was funded. As you know, we have been not receiving the money from the state Jumpstart program, the state bond program, as programmed. So those green arrows are really on paper only. The 10-year capital funding need grew to a total of $36.1 billion to achieve and maintain a state of good repair over a 10-year period. About $20 billion of that is comprised of already past due projects known as the backlog. If we were to focus on just what is needed to keep the backlog from growing, the amount would be about $1.6 billion a year. The number of major mechanical failures also increased, again, pointing to the winter weather as a problem area for this, and so that caused a decline in major miles between major mechanical failures. Another factor affecting this is the percent of vehicles beyond useful life, which is growing slightly. It's up to 30.7%, and that's the highest percentage we've had since 2006. And rolling stock constitutes about 1/3 of our capital need. In that 36.1 billion number, rolling stock represents 12.6 billion. So this is an interesting chart, we think. It shows the comparison between capital programming, needs, and funding. So the red line on the top represents our capital funding need if we were to achieve a state of good repair over 20 years, and that's about $2.6 billion in 2014. The blue bars represent our funding levels, and again, they're higher in some years related to state funding, which hasn't really materialized. And then the yellow dotted line represents what we actually have expended. So you can see there's quite a difference between what we expend, what we're actually able to expend, and what our need is. And the last area that we're looking at is the area of solvency. Each service board had some good news in 2014 as fare revenues were up across the board without any fare increases. Regionally, fare revenues were up 1.7% in 2014 and 20.5% higher compared to 2010, with 5-year growth due to fare increases at CTA and Metra. With operating cost increases that exceeded the rate of inflation, the fare revenue shortfall per passenger trip has increased 25 cents since 2010. This amount must be covered through other means, such as system-generated revenue or operating subsidies. Now we'll take a closer look at PACE. This also is kind of interesting because PACE hasn't had any increase in their fare, but their revenue has been increasing steadily over the 5-year period. On the left, you can see the yellow line, which represents fare revenue, and the blue bars, which represent ridership. So between 2010 and 2013, the growth that is occurring is pretty much in step with ridership. But then in 2014, with the transition to Ventra, you see a big jump up in revenue. So there's a couple of factors that are contributing to this. One is that the CTA and PACE have now a more accurate revenue sharing arrangement as a result of the data that Ventra supplies, so it's more accurately representing the trips that each service board are providing. The second is that the increase in the use of pay-as-you-go fares, as I mentioned, has increased the average fare. So the chart on the right shows the average fare, and you can see a jump in 2014 of the average fare increasing. And then finally, PACE, in an effort to get people to convert to Ventra, eliminated the reduced price transfers for cash-paying customers last July. So now customers who take a 2-vehicle trip paying with cash have to pay 2 complete fares. So that has increased some revenue for that segment of the population, of the ridership population. So that's the end of the report for 2014, and just to look ahead for 2016, we'll be doing the peer performance reports. That'll be completed in the first quarter of 2016. And then we'll be looking at doing another customer satisfaction survey toward the fall of 2016. So that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Not a good report. I have a couple, I don't know whether observations or comments. Can you measure the short-haul bus decline as being more local, like short trips rather than longer trips? Because there is an increase in the choices now that commuters have between, say, Divvy,
Right.
Uber, Lyft, and the regular taxi cab system.
So we have observed that there is a decrease in the shorter trips, and that's one reason that the average trip length is increasing over time. And so we are hypothesizing that it may be that people are taking these alternatives, especially walking and Divvy, for some of those short trips that they may have just hopped on the bus for before. Yeah, that could.
They would anticipate, though, that in January and February, Divvy probably doesn't work as well with 12 inches of snow.
Right, but we operate Divvy all year long, so they don't close up for winter.
Are those, is somebody measuring Divvy ridership?
Oh, yes. Yeah, they've had, I don't have
is
the
that the
figures, but they've had tremendous growth since
Yeah,
they've introduced the
I
program.
duck those blue bikes all the time.
Right.
But was the City of Chicago Transit Department
Yes.
do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Those would be interesting figures to see,
Yeah, we could get those.
what the ridership is there. Are there any other comments? Director Hobson.
Thank you. One of the things that concerns me most is the service delivery slide that you presented, showing a decrease in customer satisfaction, decrease in on-time performance. Coming from the private sector, if we had that kind of performance with our customers, I'd be very concerned about our viability. Is there anything that we can do as a board to encourage the other service boards to improve their service delivery metrics, and is there anything that we can do to hold them to those metrics?
Well, I mean, I guess I would first say that all of the service boards do pay very close attention to the metrics, and we do discuss them with each of the service boards and look at the changes in performance. So they don't ignore these declines when they see it. So the customer satisfaction survey results are something that they are concerned about, and they look at, the causes for that. As a board, I think you are doing a lot as a board by requiring these to be reported on a regular basis and reviewed on a regular basis. I'm not sure exactly, what more you could ask them to do.
And I was just going to highlight something. Donna did mention it in her summary. While, the numbers did drop off a little bit, the numbers are still relatively high. What was the overall satisfaction? Oh, the recommendation to other people would still be at 87%. So our numbers are still high. And if you think back to some of the peer comparison reports that she had done a couple of months ago, where in many cases at or exceeding many of our peers around the country. So even though there was a drop-off sort of year over year in some of these measures, I don't want people to think that we've sort of really gone in the tank.
I mean, I know we also discussed with, the targets, and you could try and have targets, but for customer satisfaction, I mean, obviously you want the target to be very high. You want it to be something in the 90s. So I think that's almost an unspoken target. You have to be careful because that's a somewhat subjective survey process. It's just asking people their opinions. And so you don't want to get something that is going to be too hard in terms of the numbers. You want just to be able to look at the trends and make sure that those trends are going up and that you're reaching that level of high 80s and 90s. So I'm not sure that there would be an improvement for that particular measure by setting an absolute target.
Yeah, but I mean, I look at the more detailed report and I see the customer value of the service and the overall satisfaction. Those are 74 and 77.
Right, those were low.
Yes, those were low. Do you anticipate that the 2016 customer satisfaction survey that we'll see better results?
Yes, and in fact, Metro did a kind of informal on their website survey to see if the measures were going up, and they asked just a couple of questions about overall satisfaction, and they did see an improvement in that already. So they had, in addition to the polar vortex, and they also had a lot of work that was being done on the BNSF line, and that's one of their biggest lines. And so there was also some delays related to that all through the spring, and so that project has been completed, and that was another factor that was influencing the negative results.
And when will the 2016 result be presented to us? Will that be in 2017 that we'll actually see that result?
Probably in 2017,
Okay,
yes.
so we're talking 2 years from now that we'll actually see the next customer satisfaction survey.
As a full survey, yes.
It's a full survey. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Director McGillis.
Thank you. I just had a couple of follow-up questions, I guess, to what was being talked about. I think on a chart like this that show an up and down arrow on something as important as the topic, we ought to show the numbers right next to that arrow, because in some cases it's minimal change. Other cases, like the ridership, it's a little bit more drastic. But when I see something like this, I see all these down arrows. Well, what does that really mean? How severe is it to be? I mean, I read the detail report, and I realize
Right.
we have a detail report, but when we're doing it publicly
Okay.
at a meeting like this, I think that would really help
Okay.
to put it in better perspective. Then the other thing I just wanted to comment on, you mentioned how on time is really, we're doing pretty good. We're at 94% or whatever it was, and if you look at what it really was before, it's only down a couple of percentages, so it's not
Right.
bad. However, we talk about how the weather has caused all these problems as a reason for them. You would think if our on-time performance is that close to normal, we would not have had as many negative survey results, unless there are other things like you just mentioned, one of the lines that was down. So I think we need to have a better understanding of the survey, I guess, condition in which it's taken, and put it in proper perspective, because so many times we hear, well, the weather's the reason the budget went up. I mean, but here's an example where performance doesn't exactly show that weather having that much of a major negative impact on ridership. So there's just something missing, I guess, when you try to put it together. And I think we ought to use this information to try to do some good things with it. I mean, try to address it. But if I think it's the weather, I know I can't change that.
Right.
But if it's not really that, maybe there's something we could do.
Right, and so the weather was, like you would have seen a bigger drop in the on-time performance in the months of January, especially January. But a couple of percentage points fall for like Metra is significant for them. So they try and be above 95% as their standard, and so
Right.
being below that for the year is lower than they would want to be, for sure.
Thank you.
Yes, Director Ross.
Director Ross.
I just want to remind us, I think some of these data sets are more complicated maybe than we're alluding to. As an example, the trains might be running on time, and so you could assume that the customer should be happy, but what if the cars are cold? So there are some other issues out there that, that we need to look at carefully. I guess the question I have is, if we look at our peer groups, are there any things we can garner based on their customer satisfaction compared to ours in terms of what might be national trends? Because I assume some of these things are not just happening in this market, they're happening in other markets as well.
Right. Well, I mean, some of the things that customers key in on as being most important are speed and reliability. Cleanliness, though, is another factor that's very important, and comfort in the cars that they're riding in. So.
One question I had in terms of customer satisfaction, I've heard this a lot, particularly since I take Metro, is the Wi-Fi aspect. And I know we've talked about it over time, but was any of that a strong correlation to customer satisfaction? And do we have any idea about the timing on when some of these Wi-Fi enablements may be added to the transportation teams?
I mean, they did ask about Wi-Fi. I don't have the statistics right in front of me of how important that was, but they also asked how many people had, mobile devices and what they used, and so many people had access through their mobile devices that Wi-Fi wasn't quite as important as they might have thought. But I don't know what the
They are still
implementation-
planning to do a demonstration on, I believe it's one of their lines, and someone just told me the date of that, and I'll verify, but I believe they were saying it was sort of early next year. But I can verify that for you.
Metra has a test going on right now, 10 different areas, and I think by the end of the year, they hope to evaluate it. Right, so they've already approved it.
Chairman Dillard.
I was just following up with Director Lewis said. I think we also, we've had so many stories out there in the newspapers about e-ticketing rollouts for Metra Wi-Fi, which Michael, I think that's what I hear a lot is, what are you doing? And we tickle the fancy of the public with some of these ideas that we are rolling out. And we build their expectations. And in a customer satisfaction thing or survey, sometimes we heighten their sensitivity to some of these things. Tomorrow, without spilling the beans, we're gonna make an announcement about Union Station with the mayor, which also on the line I ride, the station itself has been a problem with water main breaks and other things. But I think that when we get the next survey back, Director Hobson, the difference in service, especially on Metra and its performance in the last 18 months compared to the previous year, I think will be night and day. We see it in on-time statistics. I just see it in the line I ride all the time. The improvements since Mr. Orsino has taken over have been very good on Metra. And, I think the next time we see one of these surveys, hopefully they'll go up. We've also had a lot of publicity about the aging of Metra's fleet, and just doing my anecdotal surveys with people, I think most customers don't understand how old many of those cars are, and then when we tell them they're old, they build up in their mind, wow, these cars are old and need improvement. Through great maintenance and other things, and you've got to do a cost-benefit analysis, we keep those cars obviously safe, but in pretty remarkable condition. But we, through our own methods, increase the heightened sensitivity, I think, to some of these things in our passengers. But the performance, at least on Metra, is so much better today than it was 18, 19, 20 months ago. And, the last winter was not easy, but their performance last winter was just so much better than the year before. And it's because they proactively made a number of changes to not have the kinds of problems they have before. So, I think our surveys will be better next time. And, I watch what goes on with the airlines all the time, and I view us as an airline, and I never, we're better than United Airlines, which is going to improve under their new CEO, but I'm never satisfied, and but I think things are trending very much in the right direction in a very difficult budget time for all of us.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, if not, are there any other items that I don't have on the agenda? That's it? Okay. We have a hanging motion by Director Pang and a second by Director Durante to approve the ordinance. Or no, we don't need to approve anything. Huh? That's just for information only.
You can go back to your hanging motion to adjourn.
Okay, we're hanging on the motion to adjourn then. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion, we are adjourned.
I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order.